Hey there. So I've been taking a rather extended break from the public sphere. I've been in much more of a sort of internal nurturing mode, and a little more on that later. But I started wanting to share more about the process in my studio. So about the things that I'm creating, the ideas that have been surfacing that are still sort of in the making. So often I want something to be finished up and organized and have a plan before I share it. But today's little pieces, the plan for these is basically just to like have fun and channel inspiration into forms that can be held, forms that can be made in little pockets of time where my toddler's distracted or busy or even watching along, something that interests us both, and something that doesn't take up a lot of space and definitely does not take up a whole lot of materials. So these are some of my new favorite pieces. I like to call them my little cosmic charms. Other people have called them ornaments, stuffed animals, decor. But for me, they're these little soft sculptures. They're animate objects. Some of them are animals, some of them are symbols, but all of them really feel alive to me because I don't really feel like anything is inanimate, to be honest with you. So the origin of these is very domestic, very real life. I had a toddler, and suddenly my life was filled with stuffed animals. They were everywhere. And as a textile artist, as a seamstress, I really couldn't help myself. I started studying them. I started reverse engineering them in my mind and trying to figure out what elements they're made up of. So I'm like imagining the pattern pieces and how they're organized. And she's pretending they're her babies and she's changing their diapers. And meanwhile, I'm thinking about how the form moves from flat to dimensional. How is the curve of that foot shaped? And how are those ears attached? Is that a seam that goes all the way around? And then I would find myself at the table in the studio drafting these tiny little patterns to solve these riddles. Some of the pieces I make are these full 3D animals with legs and volumes and dimension and faces. Some of them are just flat, two-dimensional shapes sewn together, but all of them get a little embroidery, a little embellishment, and a little moment of intention added in. So the origin of this series goes back to before I ever had kids. So there's two pieces that really anchored in this whole process for me that really birthed this experience. The first is this bunny. I call her Bun Dog because she ended up looking kind of like a dog. She was one of the very first ones that I made while I was pregnant with my daughter. Most people go into some sort of like a nesting mode when they get pregnant. I did not get into any sort of nesting mode. I got into a crafting mode, which is really inconvenient when you're like, I actually need to be cleaning the house, but I'm like making stuffed animals and sweaters. So anyways, the bun dog was made from old scraps of sweaters that had already lived a long life. And watching this dog go from this bunny go from a flat pattern to three-dimensional form, it felt very similar to garment pattern making. That moment where something suddenly has volume, it gets personality and weight. I was like, oh my gosh, I love this so much. And that's when I knew I wanted to keep making these, but you have less and less time the more and more your kid grows up. The second anchor for this experience goes back even further, probably a decade ago, maybe more. I spent a summer living on a farm with my friends over at Majestic Farm. It was a pig and chicken farm, and we lived in a trailer on the land that later became an apple orchard. It was just like a mud pile at the time. But during that time, I was working with a lot of upcycled denim, which was basically free as far as materials go. It was never ending. People were just always handing me their old jeans, saying, "Hey, can you use this?" So I would set up a place outside. I had my tarp. I would sit outside in the sun. If it was raining, I was under the tarp. If not, I was out in the sun. And I was patchworking these intricate quilts and all these other pieces. And when my friend who owned the farm gave me a pair of her son's jeans, he was a toddler at the time, so these are very tiny pants. And for some reason, it felt only appropriate to make a tiny little animal with these, inspired by my time at the farm. So at Majestic Farm, the pigs and chickens are free range. And so oftentimes they would be escaping their fences. So I'd be sitting there sewing and like a giant sow would walk by with like 5 little piglets following behind her. So out of the toddler pants, I made a little stuffed pig during the time that I was staying there. I think one of the dogs eventually got to it, which felt appropriate. Honestly, there's like 8 dogs that live there, maybe only 5. But the pig was the beginning, and I've loved stuffed forms my entire life. I grew up surrounded by them. I grew up loving my stuffed animals, like any proper child. But as I started making them and constructing them, my shift started to focus. So I became more interested in how we can include embroidery on these as not as decoration, but as a language. So instead of like adding fur or feathers. I was like, how can I imply feathers with a stitch without reproducing it? How can I start to include the symbolism of these images? How can I, illustrate what a thunderbird or a bunny symbolizes? How can I begin to reduce that symbolism into just a few stitches? So simplifying shapes, simplifying symbols, and letting fewer marks carry a little more meaning, and seeing how small stitched gestures could start to communicate different things. Like this one ended up looking a lot like the Egyptian god Bastet. The ears just ended up gargantuan. So I wanted to make it this like cosmic deity. And what I love most about these pieces is that they actually get used. So many of these bigger ones, especially, these live with my daughter. They're held, they're dragged, they're loved. The ones that I make for other people, obviously they don't go to her. That would be way too risky. She's like, those are kind of off limits. She understands that. But there's this funny irony here where I've brought these to markets before, mostly just as an example of the many different ways we can work with embroidery in our lives. And people are like, oh, how much does that cost? And I'm just kind of like, it's too much. It's too much. This would be like a $200, $300, $400 stuffed animal. And that's fine for me. They are fine art. They are sculptures. But when they're in the form of a stuffed animal, people don't always understand that. And I don't feel like explaining it a lot of the times. I don't feel like explaining the intention and the symbolism and the labor that goes into it. And I don't feel like explaining that, no, I don't want to mass manufacture them. I don't want to get them produced. I want to keep them as handcrafted pieces. So instead, I just smile and say, oh, they're not for sale. They're just for display. And then I don't have to explain to somebody why a stuffed animal costs $350. Because it's not a stuffed animal. It's a work of art that occasionally gets picked up and carried around by a kid. So let's take a tour of some of these pieces. Some are pulled directly from my daughter's toy bin. Some were made to sell to friends who know exactly how much I labored over them. And some I'm thinking about making into kits. So let me know if you would like to see these as kits. I'm not sure yet. I have to figure all the details of that yet. So this is one of the ones I made while I was pregnant also. Very important to make stuffed animals and not, I don't know, clean out your refrigerator. But this is, what is that? Dragonosaurus, I called it. It's a little bit of a dragon, a little bit of a stegosaurus, which was cool because my daughter ended up loving dinosaurs. And I came up with a little story about how this is her thunderfoot. So this is where she stomps on it. I don't think I've shared that story with my daughter yet. She's like finally at the age where she's starting to understand these more complex stories. What I love about my Dragonosaurus is that the wings are all wonky, but also that the head is totally crooked. So she's always kind of looking to one side. But we've got these dots stitched on, and these are wool felt pieces, and then a little bit of velvet scraps on the belly. And then we have one of the ones I've been showing on screen. This one has gotten a little bit torn apart. As I mentioned, these are played with on a regular basis. These are loved. These are held. These are delighted in. So they end up getting a little bit snagged and a little bit worn, and that's okay with me. This is one of the ones that I went with a little more 3D of a form on it, figuring out just how to sew these 3D pieces. And this cosmic owl, just kind of channeling the nighttime qualities of the owl and that sort of like nighttime essence and the night sky within that, and really working with that. And again, trying to illustrate, how do I illustrate feathers? And I love the fly stitch for that. I might go into a video on the fly stitch a little more detailed. Here we have a herringbone stitch and just a bunch of straight stitches making stars. Some of those threads are sparkly, the DMC Etoile thread, which I love. And then the eyes are applique fabric with a little couching stitch around the edge. So yeah. And here is a close-up of the Bastet cat. And getting into a little more detail, a little more cosmic detail. Again, this is a deity of Egyptian mythology. So wanting to really channel that quality within there, and the heart, because I just love cats so much. And yeah, her ears ended up huge. I figured out how to make a 3D shape on the nose, but in the process ended up having to really cut into the head a lot. These are all like really process pieces. None of them are totally evolved patterns. These little ones, I worked actually on the patterns for a little bit longer. These two were for a workshop I did last year with a company called Stitch Club. I think they're based out of the UK. Actually, I know they're based out of the UK. And here, this one was from my applique altars workshop, building a fabric shrine workshop on applique. And this piece is appliqued on, and I just thought it would make such a fun little cosmic charm. It just didn't feel complete enough in a hoop. I'm gonna probably add more beads to the top and add some gemstones there to sort of channel in that portal quality to it. I also added a little bit of fringe on the bottom of this one before I sewed it together. That is something I'm really gonna probably continue to do. This fish is another one. Oh, this is a tag on from the market I did. This fish is another one that I added fringe on. This fringe is like a synthetic sparkly yarn, and it does not behave very well, so it's a little bit unruly, which adds to the effect, but it was just like, okay, note to self, maybe not use that yarn. This is why I love natural fibers, because they are just a little bit more, I don't want to call them predictable. But yeah, so channeling the imagery of the fish, channeling that underwater essence, channeling the scales, and seeing how I can illustrate that in stitches. The bunny, the fur of this rabbit, the sort of growing quality of the rabbit family, as they tend to do. And I gave it a little saddle just for fun. So yeah, these are some of my favorites. And I also have this giant butterfly, which has gotten a little bit messy. And this is one of the ones where I'm like, this would be like a $400 or $500 piece. This took me forever to make. It was really hard to figure out how to get the centerpiece in. I ended up having to do a lot of hand sewing on that one. So just technique-wise, it was a little complex. The embroidery on it, the machine applique on it, everything is a little bit complex on it. So it lives with me, and now it becomes a little pillow that we like to have around our house. And yeah, that's all. Those eyes are all hand stitched. Those leaves and those flowers are all hand stitched. And it doesn't need to be something that needs to be sold. These pieces are special. These pieces are cherished, and I like having them at home. And the final two pieces were made, this was actually made in collaboration with my daughter. So basically I drew the fish shape on the fabric, maybe I cut out the fish shape on the fabric, and then I gave her a pile of scraps. So big old bowl of scraps that she likes to work with at my sewing room table, and let her glue them down with a glue stick. She even got involved with a little bit of a paint pen. And she wanted to make eyes for the fish, so I guess this is kind of like a grouper or something. Flounder, maybe, the fish that lay flat on the ground. Anyways, not particular. And then I went ahead and stitched down the pieces as she glued them down. It's a little bit of collaborative effort. And this is just a warning. When you tell your daughter, when you tell your child, oh, we don't have to buy that, we can just make it at home, don't assume that they're going to forget. So we found this little pig at one of the local shops, and I was like, we do not need to buy a tiny stuffed animal. We have so many stuffed animals at home, we do not need to purchase anymore. So I said, we can just make one when we get home. She did not forget. She said, when are we going to make the pig? I want it in orange. So we made an orange pig, and these are the tiniest little pattern pieces. And this one already is starting. I didn't really sew that very well. So yeah, just a warning. Don't tell your child you're going to make something unless you actually plan on bringing it home and making it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this tour of my somewhere between my studio, desktop, and my daughter's toy bin. This is the space that I don't think gets enough attention, the space between daily domestic life and artistic devotion. The art that is meant to be lived with, to be cuddled and to be held, the art that is comfort. Not to be displayed on the stark white walls of a gallery, but to be in life. This is the art that we miss out on when we see the domestic space as lesser than, or when we try and distinguish between the artist and the craftsman. Oftentimes, they are the exact same person. All right, I'll be back in a couple weeks, hopefully with a little more from the studio, maybe touring some of my favorite supplies is what I was thinking in the next video. Much like this video, like these little things that get used on a daily basis with tender loving care. And if you want to know what I'm up to when I'm not on YouTube or Instagram, which is most of the time, be sure you are signed up for my newsletter. I'm still sending out regular updates, new products in the shop, what I'm working on, things that I'm enjoying. For example, the pocket altar kits that I sold earlier this month, they sold out like instantly. My newsletter is always going to be where I spend my time and focus because it feels like this extension of my studio. It's not like this giant public space, so it's much more natural for me to share in that space. It just feels a little more gentle on the soul. So yeah, I will be back soon. Enjoy.